So it seems like Nintendo's popularity has been slowly declining over the past couple of years. One of the main reasons why that's the case is because of the corporation's war on piracy, and rightfully so, depending on who you ask, because on one hand, it's considered to be illegal, but at the same time, um, there are many individuals and organizations that have been making millions off of pirating and emulators and stuff like that. And this has been a thing that has gone back, I don't even know how many years, but like I feel like the lawsuits really got started like during the 2020s decade. And we had some major ones within the past couple of years. Like the most recent one is the one with a Reddit moderator who basically was pirating, I guess, Switch games, and he was operating multiple piracy sites. And because of that, Nintendo, I guess, is suing the Reddit moderator Archbox for like 4.5 million in damages. And I don't know why people continue doing this, knowing the fact that Nintendo, within the past couple of years, have been very picky with, I guess, with like copyright infringement and with IPs and stuff like that. And like we had a couple of big ones, and we had some lawsuits like going all the way back to like 2022. I think the Gary Bowser situation was really serious, and I think that guy got sentenced like over a year in prison for like selling like piracy devices and stuff like that. Plus he had to pay back Nintendo over 14 million in damages. And then you had the Yuzu emulator situation back in 2024, and I believe there was like two other people who they were running like a piracy operation. And I think they had to pay up as well. But the bottom line is like every lawsuit that Nintendo's got into with people who have been pirating their IPs and stuff like that, they ended up taking them to court. And I guess like the defendant ended up paying them billions back for damages and stuff like that. And honestly, like on one hand, it's not a good look for Nintendo, but on the other hand, I get why they did what they did because obviously, that's money that they should be making, and not only that, it's one of those things where like piracy is something that's actually like damaging to like many people because I read on this website called the Wrap that digital piracy and illegal streaming services have been costing the US economy about 30 billion each year within the past couple of years. So that's kind of a big deal. And I don't think a lot of people were aware of the economic effects that piracy has had on the economy. And I guess the people who do that, they try to justify by saying that, a lot of big gaming giants and corporations have been price gouging with their services and their products and all that other stuff. And it's not just with gaming. I mean, it's just with like streaming in general, or just like anything in general for that matter. Like whether it's technology, whether it's TV, whether it's gaming. It seemed like price gouging and corporate greed is something that's been like a major issue in this country. And I feel like this is something that really got started after COVID. And and yeah, I mean, a lot of people complain about like the teens decade or the second half of the teens decade being awful. I mean, we didn't have to deal with any of this mess, prior to that. And I feel like about a decade ago, or almost a decade ago, like Nintendo was beloved. I mean, it's like they had the Switch console coming out, they had Super Mario Odyssey, they had Super Mario 8 Deluxe. People were eating up their products like crazy, and it seemed like after COVID, everything just changed and more companies just became greedy and, picky and stuff like that. And I don't know, like with Nintendo, on one hand, you can see why they're doing what they're doing, but on the other hand, it's something that's kind of hurting their reputation and it's causing like, backlash within the online gaming community. And it's not just Nintendo that's been dealing with this. There's been plenty of other gaming companies that have had that's had backlash towards them for their actions. Like, for example, I believe this past year in the summer of 2024, Activision had shut down like a Call of Duty Modern Warfare remake because of a cease and desist order that had taken place. I believe it was back in August, and yeah, I mean, it was the H2M like mod project that people were ecstatic about, and ever since Activision shut that down, it seemed like people had soured towards the Call of Duty franchise altogether because they constantly want Activision to remake some of their older games that never got proper remakes. But like the most they'll do is they'll take maps from older games and they'll pretty much add it as DLC to some of their newer games. And then you look at like their most recent main entry of the Call of Duty series, Black Ops 6. It's a game that looked decent to the point where it was a step up from what came before it, because anything was a step up from the Call of Duty game that we got back in 2023. But a lot of people, said that it was horrible, and they just didn't like it. And I think the actions that Activision took in shutting down that mod project definitely affected people's perception on the company and on the franchise in general. And you're looking at Black Ops 7, right? You look at Black Ops 7, and we got Battlefield 6, those games coming out. People are looking forward more to, they're looking more forward to like Battlefield 6 than they are Black Ops 7. And I think it's one of those things where like people I guess people just don't like the whole idea of AI being a major part of the story in Black Ops 7. That could be part of it. Another part of it is that Activision pissed off their fan base, and obviously that's probably going to have a detrimental effect on sales. I'm just going to put it this way: I don't see Black Ops 7 surpassing Call of Duty Black Ops 1 or Black Ops 2. I feel like that time period during like the late 2000s and like the early teens was probably the peak of the Call of Duty franchise. And don't get me wrong, Call of Duty Warzone was a massive success. People like Vanguard. The Call of Duty game from 2019, a lot of people said was overrated as hell. A lot of people like Call of Duty World War II, which came out back in 2017, I believe. Yeah, it's like I feel like during the teens decade, like the Call of Duty franchise had its series of highs and lows, but honestly, if we're talking about its peak period, in my opinion, it was probably the early teens with the first two Black Ops games. But yeah, you look at Nintendo, it seems like they kind of ruined things with Mario Kart World. And don't get me wrong, I think it's gotten off to a decent start in terms of sales. A lot of people liked the game. It was critically acclaimed when it came out until they made that update to the online gameplay where I guess like it forced people to choose intermission races opposed to traditional 3-lap races. And people were upset about that, and it overall affected the quality of the game itself. And I don't know, it's something that didn't need to happen, but it is what it is. I mean, I feel like Nintendo's already made their money and all that, but the cost of everything's going up because of like tariffs and because of the economy getting worse and all that other stuff, and it's going to make their products even more expensive. So if you already have your fan base pissed off at you and everything is going up, the cost of living, the cost of gaming, it's just it's going to have a detrimental effect on business, overall. And I don't think that's something that's really going to really help Nintendo in the future at all. But but yeah, I mean, I think, piracy in general is getting out of hand, but at the same time, a lot of people feel like it's necessary because, they can't afford, what new companies are putting out because they feel like it's ridiculously overpriced. But it depends on who you are and I guess what class you are in this country. A lot of people are just like hardworking Americans struggling to get by, and then you have wealthy people who can, afford this stuff, but they probably don't care because they don't have time to care about it. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like we're seeing a slow but rapid decline in gaming that I don't think I've ever seen in my entire life, because I remember back in the 90s or the 2000s, this type of stuff was never really an issue. Hell, even like the first half of the teens decade, this stuff was not really an issue. It felt like corporations were doing everything they can to keep their fan base happy, and then at the same time trying to make as much money as they can. But I feel like it's being done in a way where they give the customer as little as they can, but then it's overpriced. But it depends on what company you look at. There are like some people who are diehard fans of Nintendo who will buy their products no matter what. And there are some people who feel like, you know, something, it's not worth it. The older stuff was a lot better. But you know, everybody has like different opinions on stuff like that. And seeing what Nintendo has become in this day and age, there are people who wonder how different things would have been if Sega had won the console wars. It's probably one of the biggest what ifs within the history of gaming, but you know, I digress. But you know what? This is actually perfect because I think Sega's supposed to be doing something really big like next year because there's been talk for like over a year that Sega's supposed to be working on some type of big super game project, and there's not too many details on what it is. But if they decide to get back into the console wars, I feel like this would be the perfect time because a lot of people are starting to sour on Nintendo, and and you know if Sega comes out with another game system, I'm pretty sure that like sales will go through the roof if it's priced at a decent rate. But for the most part, I don't know. I can't see Sega going back into the console wars, not at the moment, anyways. But they definitely have a big plan that's going to, I guess, it's going to help them achieve the type of mainstream attention they got back in the 90s before they stopped producing consoles in 2001. But but yeah, it's like if Sega does decide to re-enter the console wars, will they be able to keep up with Microsoft? Will they be able to keep up with Sony? I mean, I think at this point, Nintendo is kind of having a hard time keeping up with Sony because I feel like when it comes to game consoles in general, it seemed like Sony is probably the most popular because you don't hear too much about Sony doing things that piss off their fan base or anything like that. I think the worst thing that they've done recently is they removed PlayStation 3 games from like the PS Store, the Game Pass. So, or maybe it was like PlayStation 4 games. So you can only buy like PS5 games. But that's not necessarily a big deal because you can get a lot of like PS3, PS4 games from used video game stores and stuff like that. And understandably so because they want people to focus on PS5 games so they can make more of a profit. So it's not necessarily that bad. And I don't know. I don't hear too many things about Sony or PlayStation having like issues with customers because of like piracy or anything like that. In fact, you look at like the games that are published by Sony, it seems like people people are like ecstatic about like the next major game that's going to come out. Like for example, in the future, like between 2026 and 2027, we're supposed to be getting a new Wolverine game, we're supposed to be getting a new Blade game, and later down the line, probably around the time the PlayStation 6 comes out, we're probably going to be getting Marvel's Spider-Man 3, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed and hoping that happens within this generation. But the PlayStation 5 has been around for like 5 years now, so I don't know. Like after every like 8 years or whatever, like Sony likes to release a new console. So who knows? We might get Marvel Spider-Man 3 for the PlayStation 5 if we're lucky. But yeah, I mean, I honestly feel like all the controversy and all the issues that Nintendo has been engaged in recently, it's definitely not helping them. It's something that's going to hurt them and be detrimental to them in relation to the console wars. But I don't think that's necessarily their priority right now because obviously Nintendo knows who their audience is. They cater more towards children. They focus more on like a family friendly audience, while Sony and PlayStation focuses more on adults. Same thing can be said for Microsoft and its games. But yeah, it's crazy that Nintendo has declared war on piracy because I don't think this has been a thing like back in the 90s or 2000s or the teens decade. It's something that just started recently, and I guess maybe the old guard or maybe like old management probably didn't care at the time, but or maybe it's possible that nowadays like people who pirate video games and like resell them and stuff like that, they make more money now than they did back in the day, and as a result they're cracking down on it and stuff like that. Who knows? But either way, you got this whole thing and you got the whole Pal World controversy, and yeah, I believe like Nintendo and Pocket Pair, the creators of Power World, are engaged in a legal battle in relation to, I guess, the IP for Pal World, because I guess the IP looks too similar to that of Pokemon. So it's basically like, Pokemon for adults but with guns. And you also have like little like balls where you can capture creatures. Like the concept is similar, but it's like a twist or whatever. I feel like Pal World is something that Nintendo could have did if they decided to give Pokemon its own spin-off series, but they never went in that direction because they constantly tried to appeal to kids and casuals and all that other stuff. So, it is what it is. But yeah, I feel like Nintendo's war on piracy might end up lasting, the rest of the decade. And I feel like this whole thing, I think if anything, it's going to piss off adults more than it's going to piss off children and families and stuff like that because, children don't know what the hell's going on. Um, parents, obviously, they're going to be against piracy and stuff like that, and they probably don't know too much about it, or they'll just go and get their kids like a Switch One or a PlayStation 4 or whatever the hell they can afford. But yeah, I honestly feel like high prices and the cost of living going up and stuff like that is kind of it's indirectly responsible for corporate greed, but at the same time, I don't know. It's not entirely the corporation's fault. It's just that, the cost of everything is going up. And because of that, it's having a ripple effect on just about everything and everyone. And, we are where we are. And unfortunately, I feel like things are only going to get worse before they get better.